And then we'll go over here to our participants. We have, it's just you and me so far. So we'll see what we do. If we don't get anybody, then you and I'll just have a nice chat and move on.
Well, I know we have some people signed up, but I don't know how many.
I think there were 3 or 4. So, and that's okay. I'm not really numbers conscious as much as I am, are there people we can help? So it was sure nice of you to send that, give us information or send that proposal over to that one credit union.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Perfect. And you know, maybe what they'd like is their own one-on-one demo, and we're happy to do
Well,
it.
I think that's what's going to happen because they're in the middle of doing something major with their field of membership, and it's kind of difficult for them to get out.
Sure, sure. Well, we'd be delighted to do, you know, we're always delighted to do demos. I'm going to sneak really quickly and just get some water. I'll be right back.
All right. Welcome to sunny Florida. You there, Donna?
Oh, there we go.
And welcome to sunny Florida.
Officer, I was not speeding, I promise. I love it.
I like that. Oh, thanks.
I promise I will be good. I had an interesting experience. Well, I guess it's been a couple of
Are we
years.
live?
Pardon me?
I said, are we live?
We are live. We are live and ready to go. But no attendees yet. So I'm just gonna, I had an interesting experience. I was coming down from Northern California from a place called Wairika, which is north of Lake Mount Shasta and Lake Shasta. And when you get down out of the mountains to Redding, it becomes very straight on the 5, just straight as an arrow. And I had someone come by me about 95 miles an hour, and I thought I'll just stay behind and use them as bear bait. And it worked until she went through or the opening before the policeman got there, and all he saw was me. So he pulled me over, and I'll finish the story another time. It had a very, very nice outcome, though.
Very good. Very good. We have anybody on board yet?
Yeah, Ed, how do I pronounce Bourgeois?
Bourgeois.
Bourgeois.
Ed Bourgeois. Welcome, Ed.
Looks like he has, let me allow him.
Can you hear me now?
There
Yes,
we are.
we can,
Hi,
Ed.
Ed. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. Hello, Grant.
Hello, Ed. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
We're waiting for a few more to click on here.
All right.
Ed, could I ask, AutoLink, tell me, what is that, a indirect program? What does AutoLink do?
No, it's actually direct or indirect. We're a credit union centric auto lending solution. Whether the credit union does indirect or direct or anything, we have patent pending technology that sits on the credit union's website where the member can do all their research, get car pricing, you know, ultimately funneling into the credit union's auto lending solution.
Okay.
And we have a whole marketing program that goes behind it to market to the member. If you're thinking of buying a car, credit union's got your back. And it supports,
Cool.
it supports indirect as well. If they do indirect, we rather than just sending them to the indirect dealer will actually show the indirect inventory right on the credit union's website.
Tremendous. That sounds like quite a thing. I guess you have a website that's accessible.
Yes, our corporate website is called bookmoreautoloans.com.
Ha!
Yeah.
And where are you?
Bookmoreautoloans.com.
And where are you headquartered?
In New Orleans.
Very good. I can hear that little bit of Nolans in your slang there. I like it.
Yeah, when you say it as much as I say it, it just kind of rolls off your tongue. Nolans.
Yeah, Nolans. I've spent. Sometimes I say too much time there.
New Orleans is like Las Vegas. 3 days is about enough, right?
Yep. You're exactly right. I was walking down. I was presenting at a conference there, and it was in the evening, and a group of us started walking down Bourbon Street. First time I'd ever been there, and it's a little overwhelming, but I'll never forget the sight. There's a I think it's a penthouse building there, that's down about a block or so down, if I remember right.
Yep.
And there were people up above that looked like they're bunny kind of whatever they called them. I don't know that much about that stuff, but they had beads, and there was and they had magazines, and a husband and wife were down below, and the wife raised her shirt so she could get one of those magazines for her husband. And I thought, that did not sound right to me. My wife wouldn't do that. And I thought, this is Nolans.
Yeah, it can get a little crazy sometimes.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, I love the food. Wow.
Oh, the food. Yeah, the food is, I have to admit, we love to eat down here, and we love to cook. All the Cajun, I'm a Cajun, and my mother taught all of us how to cook before we left the house. So the cooking, the food, the restaurants, you got to be really good, or you're not in business very long in the restaurant.
Yeah. Now, I remember there was a place like Mother's or Mama's that was over.
Mother's.
Mother's.
Yeah, Mother's.
Is it still there?
Oh yeah.
Oh, they know how to cook food. They know how to cook Cajun. Good place.
Yep.
Go in there for red beans and rice, and then run down for beignets.
Exactly.
Demand, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, now you got me hungry for lunch.
Now, where are you out of, Randy?
We are headquartered in Eagle, Idaho, which is not Nolans for sure.
Right.
Now we're just 10 miles west of the center of Boise.
Okay.
So about 8 miles north of the interstate, up Eagle Road, which is Highway 55.
Yeah.
And and then I used to live in Eagle. That's when we built our building here. Then we've moved out 4 miles further west out into Star. So that's where we're
good. I've only been to Idaho once, driving from Montana to Seattle.
On the 90.
On 90 through Coeur d'Alene. That was a beautiful little town there.
Yeah, Coeur d'Alene, and then over to Spokane, which is just beyond there.
Yeah, that was when you attended the healthcare credit union conference and then drove to Seattle to 10 hours.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep, we were in Bozeman, I guess it was, or Billings.
I was there.
Oh, you were. You know what? I do remember you had a presentation on
Credit migration.
Cecil.
Yep.
Cecil. Ah.
Yeah, that's my favorite friend.
That's some rough stuff.
That is.
Well, Randy, I think we should get started. They'll click in.
Yeah, I'm happy to get going. That'd be fine. I've only got 105 slides, so no, not that many. Ed Grant said my presentation last time was a little long, so I just had to throw in the 105 just to, to tease a little bit.
Right.
All right, let me kick this off if you're ready.
You bet.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to our third complimentary webinar and it's going to be on complete loan portfolio management. Our presenter today is Randy Thompson. He's a PhD and CEO of TC Risk Solutions, an LLC and a CUSO. He has consulted with credit unions for the past 32 years. He holds an advanced degree in PhD and MS in finance, statistics, economic, and public health, and taught graduate courses in finance and statistics at several universities in the Western United States. He's been a frequent speaker at our conference and several other trades throughout the industry. So let's welcome Randy today, and he's going to kick off portfolio management. Randy?
Thank you so much, Grant. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to be involved with the Firefighters Association. We value this partnership very much. In the past, we've talked about a number of topics. What I wanted to focus on today is a comprehensive view of how we manage our portfolio. You know, one time I was doing some research, and I actually wanted to talk to loan officers, and I asked them, please describe to me your job. And what they responded was a very thorough example of all the steps that it took to either attract someone in or talk to them. Some of them included marketing, is what I'm saying, talking to people to get them in. But once they got there, was taking an application, thorough underwriting, descriptions, either how to decline, how to approve the funding, the paper preparation, getting the loan on the books. What struck me, though, was that what they really described was the first half of portfolio management, of being a loan officer. Once they got to the loan being funded and the paperwork being shipped off, they were done, they thought, and moving on to something else. So what I'm hoping to do today is to try to expand that vision. Yes, that first portion that we talked about, getting the loans on the books, indeed is a significant part of the job. We're going to make sure we get enough loans, the right loans on the books. But I think it's very important to think comprehensively about how we manage that portfolio of loans from the first underwriting all the way to when that loan finally pays off. That's all part of our job. And so we're going to be looking at this from a somewhat comprehensive way to examine how we manage that. Now, I've talked about this in the past. I just like to clarify, when we talk about risk and loss are not synonyms. Risk is the likelihood that a loss will occur. It's the likelihood. And we are going to have some losses. So when we try to eliminate risk or want to minimize risk, we don't do that by taking away loss. We're trying to control within a level of acceptance, a top and a bottom of how much risk we're willing to take, how much loss we're willing to take. We don't want to have none, no risk, no return. So it's the vulnerability to that outcome. And when we talk about our loans, these are the 7 key areas that NCUA looks at, and it examines us, and our state examiners examine credit unions for risk. And what we're going to be looking for predominantly today is credit risk. That's our primary business, making loans. Now, all the others have impacts. Liquidity is impacted by lending, and interest rate risk is looking at the impacts of longer term loans. But today we're primarily talking about credit risk. And what we're going to talk about in this portfolio management is 4 key areas. 4. That's comprehensive compliant policies. I want to spend some time helping us understand exactly what NCUA wants us to do around policies in risk-based lending. And we're going to talk a little bit about pricing, just so we can understand the importance of having effective pricing. And then we'll talk about credit migration, and then we're going to talk about simple ALL for CECL. I believe that it has been made way too complicated, way too big, and way too expensive. And I'll explain that to you as we go along. So we look at these 4 areas. So I put the slides together so we can send them out and share them with people and read in more detail. I'm not going to go through everything on every slide. I just want to highlight that you need to have policies. Policies are the descriptions. They're the instruction manual on how our loan officers are to make loans. They are to be clear. They need to be clear. They should describe the tools the credit union will use, and they should talk about how those how tools will be kept up to date, and they should support all of the different aspects of risk that relate back into those policies. But they are key because they establish how much risk we're willing to take. We want to, if we're putting those together, we want to make sure that they provide guidance to management. Now, why I say to management, because remember, policies come officially or approved by the board on how much risk, what the risk management philosophy of the credit union is. So some people will have noticed that those loan policies are becoming more detailed. We're going to talk in detail now about how we can do some of that. So if we look at the guidance on lending, again, portfolio management, looking at the lending portfolio, in 1995, NCUA issued guidance letter 174, in which they provided some very specific guidance and warnings and directions on how to implement, and they authorized the implementation of risk-based pricing and risk-based lending. What they said is risk-based lending involves different types of loans and products. They want us to diversify the portfolio based on the inherent risk. So they're not saying take less risk, they're actually saying expand your risk and price for it appropriately. So the end result they want is a more diversified loan portfolio. But as it relates specifically to policies, they say prior to beginning a risk-based lending program, you need to determine the parameters for the riskier loans. See, we're going to mix lower yielding, lower risk loans with higher yielding, higher riskier loans, but you have to have parameters to do that. So as we look at that, let's talk about how we do those. The loan policies should describe the overall lending philosophy of the credit union, should provide instructions for loan officers. They may have specific policies for unique types of loans, but loan processing types have grown, and we need to be able to make sure that we're doing it all in a consistent way. So when we are approving loans, and I should know this, make sure this kind of, I want to flow this in to understand, there are two components to lending. We're going to break out into one and then the other. First is underwriting, which we're talking about now. Policies provide the guidance to do that. And basically there we're saying, is this a loan I want to make? Now I'm going to expand on that a little bit, and then secondly, if this is a loan I want to make, what rate must I charge to account for that risk? Both of those things have to be there. Is this a loan I want? And if it is, how much do I have to charge to make this loan work for the credit union and fit within my risk parameters? Okay, so credit unions need to make those decisions. You remember that the policy from NCUA said you need parameters. So we need to develop parameters for each specific risk group. We need to make sure that those are effective, and we need to make sure they're fair and reliable. Now, just for definition purposes, valid means we're measuring what we say we're actually measuring. And in a previous webinar, we talked about statistically identifying what it is we're measuring. What are the risk factors that actually lead to loss? We're going to spend time with that today. So are we measuring truly what we think we're measuring? Okay. Second, reliable. Do you get the same results from repeated applications? So if I apply these to the same person over and over again, or the same type of person over and over, will I get similar results? And finally, is it fair? Is it fair to everyone who comes through the door? So with that in mind, remember our goal is to diversify the loan portfolio, extend loans to the underserved, and make loans we would otherwise avoid. Now, wait a minute. We're going to make loans that we would otherwise avoid. Does that sound like risk management? That sounds like taking a terrible risk, right? Well, no, that's not. That's just the point. As NCUA says, remember, prior to beginning a risk-based program, it's important that the credit union determine the specific parameters. Now, I've been talking around in circles on this, trying to come from multiple directions so you can see how it all ties back into what policies are, and what NCOA's guidance is with those policies. Remember those parameters. So let me go back. I love to tell stories, teach with stories. And when I was a young loan management trainee, not long, but management trainee at First Security Bank in Ogden, Utah, back many, many years ago, I went into, as part of that training, into the main lending department in Ogden, Utah on 24th Street. And they had very specific policies. I went in there to learn and experience what being a consumer loan officer was. And the manager of that department was Dean Daly, a tall gentleman with a full head of flowing white hair, an ex collector. So he was very, very, very targeted on how he did his applications. And what he gave me was a list of criteria. He said, this is how we look at those loans. And if you look at this right here, you're going to see some of those criteria. 1 year on the job. You're going to have a minimum of 1 year on the job and no more than 45% total maximum debt to income ratio, and no delinquencies in the last year at all on your car, and 24 months. You can see the criteria. Very, very clean, very, very specific. And he used to say, if they don't match all of these, I'll remember that thumb, send them packing, send them packing. He took great pride in a 50% decline rate because he wanted very, very much as an ex-collector to limit how many of those loans actually got called by collectors. A very generous loan application, loan possibilities up to $100,000 if you're secured right and have enough income, but very, very good. And this is what these policies look like. That's the banking philosophy that I was taught all those almost 50 years ago now. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, one, they were not trying to diversify. They were not trying to reach out to the underserved. They were making sure that they were making loans to people with what we would call now A and A+ credit. And when we looked at their policies were written to give instructions to loan officers and management that the loans they wanted were loans from people with that high level of credit. And any other loan that was going to be made would be made as an exception to policy. Now let's fast forward about 30 years when I started working more exclusively with credit unions. And I started doing a lot of presentations around the country trying to get credit unions to follow the instructions in the Guidance Letter 174 that said, here's how we'd like you to be making loans. And what I found when I started to look in detail was that most of the policies that credit unions had mirrored what we had seen on that screen from the bank policies. They were written on how to make loans to A+ and A borrowers. As a result, any loans that were not made to A+, A, BBB borrowers were made as exceptions to policy. NCOFCUs don't do that. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that we need to have a way, we need to take steps to actually write specific guidance for how we are going to make loans to the non-prime. And what I would suggest is that here's a way to do that. If you'll notice here, and I put up the top just for educational purposes, kind of what those A+ and A, B and C, D and E. And if we look at this, you can see that we're actually saying there are some folks, and we're going to talk about those in more detail. Please bear with me. I'm going to take this one step at a time as we peel back the onion and talk about this in more detail. Okay, but if we look at this, there are conditions where it's appropriate to make a loan to a person with 60 days on the job. They're getting started. They may be a newbie. They may be a person who just graduated from college. We're going to talk about those as Liz's. Remember those Liz's. And they're getting a loan and they're getting started. But you'll notice here, no delinquencies in the last 6 months and a very low unsecured debt to income ratio. So what we're saying, and what we're saying is if you can fit into these criteria, we're not going to make you a $100,000 loan. We're going to make you a maximum $20,000 loan with a maximum mileage on the car, and a maximum term. So making a longer term loan to folks who are rebuilding their credit is really a way of getting them into a loan they really can't afford. So the first step that I'm suggesting as we talk about comprehensive portfolio management, remember, how much risk do we want to take? We don't want to have no risk, but where's that limit? Where's that range of that we're willing to look at? Well, let's define it in our policies. Have a section that talks about these riskier but higher rate loans, NCOA's wording, middle range, and low rate, and low risk. Define those clearly out. Now, we're going to refer back to this as we move forward, but I wanted to make sure you understand the first step is having specific guidance for your loan officers. Because a lot of people, what I found, were resistant to making loans that were exceptions to policy because the policy is what protects them. I made this loan consistent with policy, my job's safe. I made all these loans as exceptions to policies, I might be at risk, so I'm not going to take that chance. And as we talk about moving further and further through this presentation, the ABCDE may not be the primary criteria that we need to be looking at as we pick these loans. Okay, so having effective policies will include, or if effective policies will include parameters, just like NCOA asked for, that will, well, let's go back here, just parameters for the riskier loans specific to what we are willing to take, the risk we're willing to take. Now, remember we said the first step in risk-based lending is determining what loans we want to make. And we're going to, all throughout this, be talking about that. But the second was, what pricing do we want to take? And we could spend the entire time talking about pricing. All I want to do is highlight the fact that the key to effect, this is again a quote from NCUA, the key to successful risk-based lending is to ensure that your prices correctly reflect the risks and costs involved. Now, what I would suggest to you is that there are two types of credit risk. When we had those 7 areas that we looked at, I would take credit risk and I'd break it out into 2 additional parts. The first part is extended risk. That's what we typically look at. That's what we're very conscious of. We have board reports because the extended risk, my definition, extended risk is the likelihood that money that we have extended as part of the loan will not be returned to us. Those are charge-offs. Okay, we made a $10,000 loan. We ended up charging off $4,300 of it because they couldn't or wouldn't pay it back. That's extended risk. And we're very, very good. We're very, very conscientious throughout the industry in preparing charge-off reports and tracking reports and delinquency reports. And we know, our boards know exactly what's happening with extended risk. But there's also what I call expended risk. You spend, just like this, the costs involved, those costs right there, the costs involved in putting your loans on the books. You have salaries and benefits and computer systems and overhead such as building and lights and furniture and computer systems and credit reports that you pull. I mean, if we look at this in detail, we find that even moderately sized credit unions are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every quarter just to operate, whether they make loans or not, which is right now problematic as loan volume in a lot of places slowed down. The costs have not declined. You've got fixed costs. So how well are we monitoring our success in recouping all the costs, the money we spent to maintain that loan department and get those loans on the books? That can be as much as $600 per loan. How much money are you recovering? How much are you doing? Are you pricing your loans? So what we talk about here, money expended, money extended. 2 different types. What we suggest when we're looking at loan pricing is to identify your costs and do it effectively. 1, cost of funds. What are you paying in interest to maintain the deposits which is really your raw materials. And that's the discussion we had when we did our vital signs, that the deposits are just raw materials. What's the cost of those, average cost of those deposits you're holding on the books? Second, operational expense. What are you paying to run your loan department? And that really begs that you do some sort of cost analysis. We like activity-based costing for that purpose, to identify what are you spending? How many dollars are flowing out as expenses to maintain and operate your loan department? Third, collection expense. And interestingly enough, these last three need to differentiate between the different grades of paper. So A+ is going to be way less than C, D, and E, for example. But if we're covering those costs, we're going to feel a lot more comfortable making those loans. Last is charge-off expense, which leads us to a CECL application. So we break those things out so that we can differentiate by grade. Then as we make those descriptions of how much risk we're willing to take in the first, second, and third tiers, we can identify our costs in the first, second, and third tier, and assure that when we set a rate for those loans, that we're doing exactly what NCOA suggested, and that's making sure that our rates correctly reflect the risk and costs, all the costs involved in getting those loans on the books. Okay? So we've talked about policies, we've talked about and their connection to underwriting and the importance of having very specific parameters for each of the risk levels of loans that we're contemplating putting on the books. Let's talk now about understanding. At this point, we basically spent the first part looking at that front half of the lending job, which is getting the loans on the books. Now let's talk about how we manage those a little more effectively. And as we do, we're going to understand a little bit more about making the loans in the first place. And the way the concept or the tool that I've seen that works the most effectively is credit migration. I've heard lots of different names for credit migration. There's multidimensional portfolio management. That came from the examiner. You need multidimensional portfolio management, whatever that means, not Occam's razor. You need ongoing decisioning. I like that term a lot, or migration analysis, okay? They all mean exactly the same thing. And what we're finding is that I actually yesterday received from a client, a list of questions the examiners were asking. And one of them was, do you have a credit migration model you're using to monitor and manage the risk in your portfolio? This was from NCOA. I believe it was the CR07 was the one there, or 6, one of them. So NCOA is starting to ask for that. They are. And sometimes they're requiring it for the types of loans. And it provides a very, very clear picture of what's going on. Another important note is that we're going to find that we can isolate the specific group of borrowers that account for 60 to 80% of all of our losses. I mean, I can target those, I can identify them and maybe take early action. Yes, because what I'm going to be telling you is that delinquency, which is usually the key trigger that we use for a problem. Okay, it's 30 days delinquent now, let's watch it closely. In most cases, delinquency is a lagging indicator. It's not the first indicator that there's a problem. I'd like to have the early indicator, not the last one. So that's what we want to look at. So how does this credit migration stuff work? Well, we know that credit bureaus and other places, they like to look at a lot of different information. Some of them are payment history, amount of credit, available credit, employment history. There's such a long list. I just put some of the top ones here. And what they do is they use these variables, all these variables, to create what we call a regression model. And that regression model, which is what regression models do, predicts the likelihood of loss. That's kind of logical if you think about this. If a credit score tells me how likely a loan is to charge off, then having that credit score would be important. And if I know that a credit score is going down, that's increasing the likelihood of charge off, and it's going up, it's decreasing. I mean, that's logical, tying right into the regression model that they use. So let's talk about the application of this credit migration. If you look at this, here's a representation of all the members of a credit union. You know, we're looking there, we've got we've got different genders, we've got different races, we've got different ages, they're all there. And we're saying, who's putting the credit union at risk? It's a little bit like, where's Waldo? You know, let's see, where is there? Who's that person there that's we're looking for that's putting it at risk? Well, what we've found after 15 plus years, actually closer to 20 years of credit migration analysis in 23 states with over 100 credit unions, is that every single credit union has members who fall into one of 4 distinct groups. We're going to talk about those groups now. We're going to talk about how they become very important for portfolio management. Okay? So we're going to talk about those 4. And the more we understand their stories, the better job we can do in making loans, the right loans to the right people almost all the time. Because see, this is not just going to affect loans off the books, but it'll help us make better decisions when we're putting them on the books. Okay? So sit back, we're going to talk about credit migration just for a minute. We're going to talk about these 4 folks. So this is Ruth. Ruth, in this case, is a high B credit score. Now, I only say high B there to indicate that this is who this one Ruth is, because the high B is not what makes her a Ruth. The fact that she's been a high B for the last 10 years and will be for the next 10 years is what makes her a Ruth. She never changes it. She never gets too wild. She's kind of consistent, has habits, patterns, and she really does everything she can to maintain her status quo. It's what we call homeostasis. I want to stay right where I'm at. If a Ruth has some sort of problem with her income, she immediately, or he immediately starts to change things, so that, like expenditures and cutting back and adjusting, so they can maintain their status quo. Okay? So basically with the Ruth, what you see is what you get. She's a high B today. She has been for 10 years. She will be for the next 10 years. And this is what's interesting. When loan officers make loans, without exception, this is one of those places, you know, they say never say never or never say always. This is always the case. We assume when we approve a loan that we're talking to a Ruth. Now, why do I say that? We may do it, you know, kind of internally, subconsciously, but we assume, and I'll tell you why I say that. Because we assume that what we see on that loan application will be in place and available to pay that loan during the entire time the loan's on the books. Okay? If we knew their income was going away in 3 years, would we really make a 5-year loan to them? Really? If you knew that for the last 2 years they'd have no income to pay it back? No, you wouldn't. You assume that what you see is going to be there the entire term of the loan. We assume that all of our loans that we approve are Ruths, and we're correct roughly 80% of the time. Good number, but that other 20% can be a real problem for us. So there we are, Ruth. Next are Henry. Now, Henry has been an extremely good member for many, many years. He's probably been with us 15 or 20 years. He's had A+ credit almost all that time. We've given him car loans, and we gave him a Visa with a big limit on it, and we've done all kinds of product programs. He's come in for short-term loans, vacation loans. He's been a great member, super member. That's what makes it so hard for us to adapt, I believe, to when he's not anymore. Oh, he's been a good member. I've heard that quote, that statement from CEOs and from loan managers and from board members for 30 years. He's a good member. Yeah, but he's been, yes, he was. Operative term there is was. Okay? I'll share with you some information as it relates to this, the allowance for loan losses we get through towards the end of the presentation. See, Henry lost his job. And what differentiates him from a Ruth is that he doesn't want to adjust. He likes that really nice lifestyle he's had for quite a while, and he's not willing to let it go. Now, he has in his wallet 4 or 5 credit cards. We approved one for him. He hasn't been using them. He's got a 15 or 20 or $9,000 limit on 3 or 4 different cards. And he's got a backup line of credit for his checking account. And so what he does is he starts living off of unsecured debt. And as his unsecured debt begins to move up, his credit score begins to move down. Does it drop all at once? Heavens no. So over the last year, his credit score dropped from an A+ to a A, to a B, to a C, and it's now at a D. And it's on its way to E and parts beyond. We need to catch him now, because 60 to 80%, remember that number I threw out before? 60 to 80% of all losses, all charge-offs, we see this over and over and over again, come from Henry's. The problem is, well, we'll talk about that in just a second. So, third is Liz. Liz is a credit newbie. We see lots of Liz's out there. Liz just graduated from college. Took her 7 years to do it because she didn't want to borrow, get into debt with student loans. And so she would take a whole semester off, work maybe 1.5 jobs, get all the money she can so she could pay for college as she went. She's got great habits developing, but no credit score yet. So she comes to you for a loan and she wants to get to her new job. She's just graduated from college and she's excited about becoming, you name whatever job she's graduated in. She needs a car to get there. You give her a loan for that car and she pays it like clockwork and manages her money the way she has for the last 7 or 10 years. And after a year period of time, she now has an A+ credit on her credit score. What we find is those Liz's, if we do it right, remember those parameters we're talking about? Would we give her a good loan with just 2 months or 3 months on the job? I think we should at least consider it. She's now an A+. Finally, we have John. John was down in his luck when he came to the credit union. See, what happened is he used to be a stable Ruth, and he lost his job or had an impact to his job and caused him to start to adjust. And he started adapting, was going to remove some of his expenses, get rid of the cable TV, do whatever he could to bring himself and maintain stability. But then his wife had major medical problems. And as we know, 89% studies show of all bankruptcies are related to medical expenses. So his credit tanked. And he dropped to a D. Actually dropped to an E, but he had a little bit of equity in his home and he used it to go to a training program and he got a new job. Because see, Johns are rebuilding. They're hopeful. They're working hard. They're getting there. They're not sitting back and waiting for something to come to them. They're taking the initiative. And it's interesting. He goes, and in some cases, they'll actually attend financial literacy classes. We did a big study a couple of years ago for a national group. What we found is that the Johns go to those classes and they participate and they're active and their credit scores over the time of that course usually improves on an average 35 points. Henry's on the other time don't even want to go. And if they do, they don't participate, they don't come regularly, and their credit score continues to drop. See, it's not the C or D, or it's the characteristic that seems to differentiate those folks. And so you give him that loan and he continues to make payments on time. He's repaying old debts as he can. And his credit score is now improved to a D, to an A, from a D up to an A. So, here's where they were a year ago. Henry, A+, Ruth B, no credit's better than bad credit, I guess. That's why we drop her there. That's where they were a year ago. But here's where they are. Here's what they've been doing over the last year. Stable. Ruth, just stable, doing her thing. Henry's impairing. He's going down. And Liz and John are improving. That's the key we need to be looking at as we're starting to. So if we're making decisions based upon where they were a year ago, we could be making some serious mistakes. And those decisions are not necessarily making a new loan, it's maintaining the loan that they've already got. So we look at all kinds of people. They come to us. Our job is to make the best decisions we possibly can. And I'm going to go right over here to this. Let's just look here. Actually, I'm going to get out of that one and we're going to go to an actual report. Show you. This is what a credit migration report will look like. Look at that right here. You'll see across the top are the original credit grades. Now you can see these numbers, they differ for almost every credit union. So don't be hung up on these numbers here. But if you look across, you can see this is the grades in which ranges in which these loans were approved. So this credit union has $60 million of balances as of the date of the report that were A+ when the loans were approved. 27, almost 28 million that were A when the loans were approved, and so forth. Down here, they've got 19 million, almost $20 million of loans that didn't have a credit score when the loan was originally approved. Either they didn't have one or they didn't pull one. And then there's the grand total over there, 144 million. Now, what we recommend is every 6 months, as a general guideline, pulling new soft pulls. I think pulling soft pulls is crucial for portfolio management. And what we do then is we see all these loans, those $60 million that were A+ when they were originated, how many of them are A+ today? 44 million, or about 73%. How many are A? 6 million, or another 10%. And notice they're the same color, because to move beyond the first standard deviation, you've got to go down 2 grades in these top ranges. So in essence, they've got $50 million that's presenting the same risk that was when the loan was made. That's important to know. If we go down here, we've got 1.3 million or 2.27% that have dropped 2% or 2 grades down, another 1,000,001 or another almost 2% that's dropped 3 grades, 498.5, and down here, these have dropped to E. These are all in this color coding here, all of the loans that have dropped 2 grades or more that have become increased risk of loss. This color code is where 60 to 80%, I've said that number a few times, of all your losses come from. You can identify who they are. In here, these are the ones that have stayed constant. Up here, you can see, my golly, there's of the $28 million of loans that were A, 2.7 or almost 10% have moved up to A+. They are less risky than when we made the loans in the first place. Okay. If we look here, we've got 12%, almost 13, but well, 12.5% of the B loans that have moved up to A or A+. So all these in the greens have moved up to a higher range, and these are the ones where we didn't have any in the first place, any credit score in the first place. Now, this is what's important. Here are our Johns. Here are our Ruths. Here are our Henrys. And these are our Liz's. And notice the biggest concentration of Liz's is in the A+ range. Liz's and Johns are improving. They're getting better. They're getting higher, which means higher scores, which means the likelihood of loss is going down. Do you mean that if I can identify Johns in the C, D, and E category, I actually reduce my risk? Yes, that's portfolio management linked to credit migration. Now, one more piece I want to show you here that's important. We're going to move on to identifying them individually. If we look here, this is a statistic, a calculation that we feel is crucial to underwriting. And that's for each pool of loans, You'll notice here we take the total dollar amount. So here we are. This is all of them. All those green loans are the Johns and these are the Henrys. So here's the dollar amount of loans with improving credit scores. If we divide that by the total pool, that's 23%. Ones with declining credit scores, that's 7%. The difference between that is a positive 15.62. This is telling me that this pool, my underwriting for this pool is working very effectively. I am differentiating between Henrys and Johns, and the Ruths, of course, stay stable, and minimizing my exposure with Henrys. That's portfolio management. Getting the right people in and then expanding as we'll look. But notice down here, indirect RV and indirect used, it's negative. That means I've got 11% Henrys and only 3%, 3.7 Johns. That's a negative 7%. I believe this is one of the key elements, key indicators that tells us that our underwriting is problematic. It means that our parameters are not working to differentiate between Johns and Henrys, and that's what we really want. Now, knowing that, we can go one step further. I'm going to go down here just a little bit to indirect RV, and we can actually look and see that in this portfolio, see those are the Henrys, there's the Johns for this specific pool of loans. We need to compare and say, look, we've got more Henrys than Johns in the A and the B and the C, but we're not getting any from D and E. All of these loans that appear to be so high level are actually problematic. And notice 100% of all charge-offs in this pool are coming from my Henry loans. So getting to know who they are. Here we got the indirect loans, and notice here that the C, D, and E actually have more improvement than deterioration, while A plus A and B, excuse me, A plus and A are where most of our Henrys are coming from. So I want to be able to identify them. So let me show you one potential way to do that. Here in this pool, this improved deteriorated loan list, we have all the loans listed, individual loans. In this case, there are 1,891 loans. Click here, and we say I want to look at just the deteriorated loans. Okay, and I'm going to come over here and just look at visas as an example. Notice here I have a Henry. These are all Henrys. These are all people with A plus drop to C. Or, well, let's just look at this one. Here we have a credit card that was given 16 years ago. It's got a $9,000 limit. It has dropped from 753 to 635 from A plus to C. Notice that their current balance is only $3,658. If I wait till that loan becomes delinquent, I will have wait until this entire limit is used and they have no more money to pull to pay their interest expense to keep it current. Like I said, delinquency is a lagging indicator. So now is the time to contact this gentleman or this person and say, are you a Henry or a John? I won't ask that question, but that's what we're trying to find out. Are they willing to convert this to an unsecured loan, term loan? A John will. Henry won't. Don't you touch my credit limit, my Visa card. And now's the time that we could maybe reduce that limit to $4,000 and eliminate $5,000 of exposure. Now, we did a study on a $60 million credit union last year, one that we had worked with for multiple years in credit migration. And what we did is we looked at all the charge-offs they'd had over 8 consecutive quarters and went back and looked at when those loans like this one had become problematic. It said if they had reduced those limits, and we looked at just credit cards, lines of credit, and auto loans. If they had done early action like I'm suggesting here and reduce that limit to 4,000, eliminating the $5,000 of additional exposure, it would have actually reduced their allowance requirement for those three types of loans alone by over $200,000. It was closer to 220, over $200,000. Risk parameters, risk ranges. Now, on the other hand, we could take this and say, let's put them all back. How about the Johns? We've got all these loans that are improved, C to B, C to A plus. How many of those does this credit union have? Remember, there are 1,891 loans. There are 503. These are people whose credit scores are improving. They're up here in these ranges. Could we contact them and cross-sell and offer better loans and better rates so we don't lose them? Is that portfolio management? Taking active steps? I will tell you, there's a credit union in Southern California we've been working with now for about a year. They're actively doing the things we're talking about, and they've had the biggest months of loan production in the middle of COVID that they've ever had, because members are delighted. They're contacting them and saying, we've noticed your score is improving. What can we do to help you better? All right. Well, we're getting down to the end of time, and I'd like to touch just a couple of items back on the PowerPoint before we go any further. Let's go back to the PowerPoint, and let's bring that up here. Roots, we don't know much. I love this. I'm in quicksand, but I'm on a good horse. And there's our example of the Henrys we just talked about. Getting that loan and adjusting it as we can. We're looking at the exposure by getting additional people. There's that loan list we just talked about. I'll show you in this case, there was a John rebuilding his credit, gone from C plus to A plus. These are prime targets for your competitors to steal away. This credit union contacted this John, said, we'd like to redo your loan, get you a better loan, maybe a newer car that you'd like to get into. But we'd also like to take a look at all those other loans that you took out back when your credit was down in this D and C range. And you know what they ended up with was a new HELOC. He moved his Visa, his primary checking account, and a debit card. They picked up $37,500 in new balances from solid members with good credit and $1,000 of interchange income. That's cool for the credit union, but how about the member? By doing all these things for the member, they reduced their interest expense by over $300 a month. I think that member loves that credit union. Now, one last thing I just wanted to highlight. You're all thinking about CECL, you're all thinking about ways to move that. This is what we're used to. A lot of money is being spent on CECL. The CECL guy is a little bit confusing to me too. What I'd just like to highlight is that we've just finished discussions with one of the 9th largest accounting firm, credit union accounting firm in the nation. And as we discussed our CECL application, they suggested this already fits. Because see, rather than trying to go into this environment and coming up with some sort of a statistic about what kinds of loans might go bad, by using credit migration, when loans become bad, we immediately identify them and move them into a higher grade loss rate to account for that loss. It's already there. It's simple, easy. Let me show you what's an important statistic about this. In a static pool methodology, the only thing that is taken into account are Ruths and Henrys. People stable or dropping. That's all that's accounted for. Because we don't watch this, the people who are improving. The Liz's and the Johns are ignored. But in credit migration, we look at the Ruths, the Henrys, but also the Johns. And when we see the effects of decreasing credit scores on an average, it's about 39,000 in the example we used. But the effect of $1 million of increasing scores was actually a reduction of $56,000 in the allowance requirement, much like the example I told you about earlier. So in this example, which is an average of numbers we looked at, the utilization of credit migration to help manage the risk by having an appropriate CECL calculation actually caused the allowance requirement to go down by almost $18,000 in that month. So bottom line, early planning makes a big difference. I just want to show you some results of credit migration. We did a national study of people using a credit migration type application. What they found is people who were using credit migration, the ones in the blue, had a much more significant presence of loans in tiers 4, 5, and 6. People who weren't were predominantly here with lower yields. Remember, NCOFCU said we want you to reach out and serve the underserved. People using credit migration were more compliant with that instruction. Second, credit scores actually improved their score because they were now identifying, working with people, and adjusting. Their average credit scores improved at 7.3% improvement in credit scores. They had a 95% up from 41 to 70 basis points in ROA. Portfolio management works. And this is what we saw. Delinquencies declined by 35 basis points. Charge-offs declined by 16. Loan to share increased. And loan yields on average increased 34 points. So it's important to have a credit migration system that is statistically based. Just tracking scores is not enough. We need to know how to adjust them and work with them, but it's important to start somewhere. And if you need help, that's how you can contact us. So Grant, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to cram way too much into an hour. And I appreciate the partnership, and I hope that this has been of value to those who've been on board. And back to you.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and I hope they have an opportunity to take something away from this webinar. I found it very interesting. We want you to consider joining us with our next webinar, which will be September 16th, I believe. We'll let you know in developing rates that fully account for the costs and risks associated with your loans. So we hope to see you then, and thank you very much for coming.
Bye now.
Bye now.